Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. We are going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Tracy and I'm going to moderate our webinar today. We are very excited to show you QlikMaps in action and how you can use location analytics to make better business decisions. But first, I just need to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So if you do have a question during the webinar, just type it into the question box at the bottom right-hand side of your webinar screen. We will monitor the questions and someone will get back to you with an answer after the webinar is over. I also want to introduce our speakers today, Patrick Vinton and Trey Bain. Patrick is the CTO at Analytics 8. He has over 20 years of experience in all aspects of BI rollouts. He has worked in over 100 BI environments in every major industry and has co-authored 4 patents related to BI report development, SQL generation engines, and BI application server scalability. Trey is a senior sales engineer. He works to enable partners and customers and guide the future development of QlikMaps. He has worked with Qlik for nearly a decade before he started here working as a consultant. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Patrick.
Good, thanks Tracy. Thanks everybody for joining. We've got a pretty agenda today. Rather than go through all the merits of location analytics and mapping, we're just going to talk about what makes QlikMap different from other similar solutions. You know, we have a lot of resources on our website and on our blogs, and chances are you probably already looked at other solutions. So we're just going to spend just a few seconds to talk about how QlikMaps is different. Then Trey's going to show you a couple things live. He's actually going to build some stuff from scratch and show you a bunch of features there. What does make QlikMap different than other solutions out there? Well, in a word, it's fast. It's very fast to install and deploy because really all it is a Qlik extension. There are no other servers to install and configure and administer. It really just takes a couple seconds to install and deploy. It has very fast development, and as Trey's going to show you here in a very few minutes here, it really is just a point-and-click type interface. It's a self-service type paradigm where you don't have to do any coding along to get maps to work. Something else that complements that and fosters the fast development is a curated library of geographic data that we've got. So Trey's going to show you those things too, but it's a really important thing. It's a huge differentiator between QlikMaps and other solutions. You're going to see that QlikMaps enjoys fast performance, and all these things together mean it's going to have fast user adoption. Fast user adoption because it means if you're in a self-service model, the users themselves are going to use it directly, or it makes it, if you're in more of a development-centric model and rolls out to other users, it's going to make it easier for you as a developer to crank stuff out for your user community. And all of these things together mean fast time to value. I said a lot of things and used the word fast multiple times, but what are the key takeaways from what I just mentioned? The biggest is that there is no difference between a developer and an end user. And so what this does, this fosters self-service location analytics. And some people say geospatial data discovery. And one of the things that contributes to that is a curated library of global geographic data. And so as Trey's going to show you right now, it's going to make it real easy to use this library that we have created for you to snap in data into your data model and have a turnkey geographic hierarchy. And with that, I will pass it over to Trey.
Thanks, Patrick. And while we're switching over to be able to share my screen, you know, I've seen quite a few of these demos before, and often I hear people say, oh, this is really fast and this is really easy to do, but in reality you get the application in your hand and you realize this is way more complicated than they talked about. So we figured the easiest way to show you that when we say fast, we really do mean fast is just to go ahead and build one right here. So on the left-hand side here, I've got a few data files. This is going to be the one we're going to work with. I'll show you what it looks like once we get it loaded in. And then some of our QVD files. Patrick talked about our global boundary file library. These are actually some of those files that you download when you have access to QlikMaps that puts the polygons or points or even lines on the map. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll create a new map. We'll just call it housing, for lack of a better word, and click create. Now, using some of Qlik's fancy new ways of loading data in Sense, we'll go ahead and just drag over our fact table. And by dropping it on, we can kind of see what the data looks like here. We've got our postcodes on the left-hand side, and then we've got 2 different measures we can use. One is going to be occupied housing units, and one is going to be household income. Let's go ahead and add that data to the model. And now what we're going to do is we're going to drag over zip, because if you remember when we looked at the fact data, we saw a zip field that is related to this. Now, once again, remember that you get these QVD files, these boundary files from our global boundary library. So you don't have to go out and find them or create them or purchase them. You just go out and pull them down from the same place you would go out and grab QlikMaps. Now, Patrick also mentioned that we can load in, we have hierarchies built into our shapefiles. A good way of being able to see this is notice here in our county field, we also have the state field. And what that's going to do is it's going to make it very easy for us to connect our fact data to our zip, and our zip to our county, and our county to our state. Go ahead and add this. Since we've already built the hierarchy into it, we can connect it simply by clicking the little wand over here, and we see that all of the data is connected as you'd expect. Let's go ahead and load this. It takes just a few seconds, sometimes longer than others. Okay, that wasn't terribly bad. We'll click Edit Sheet, and it brings us to an empty canvas to work with. Since QlikMaps is an extension object, it's tucked away here under Custom Objects, and you'll see QlikMaps, which I'll drag over. We start with an empty map because we haven't told it anything to map. We can go over here to the Properties window, and we'll start with our first layer here. Now, in order to draw a layer, we have to pick. Do we want to show it as a polygon, or marker, or a line? And actually, what I can show you is that those are usually interchangeable whenever you're using our QVD files. Let me give you an example here. We can pick state, for example. Here we've said represent state as a polygon, and it's going to pop up here. If instead we want to represent state as a point, we could just as easily click on marker, and it would do the same thing. It's going to go through and update that as well. So you'll see the little blue markers. And if we wanted to display it as a line, we could just as easily come over here and do it as a line. I'm going to go back here to polygon just to make it simple. Now, you'll notice that there's a number of random colors that are popped up. These literally are random colors, which are great for being able to determine that all of your shapes came in, but they don't really tell you any story when it comes to the data. To do that, we're going to want to color code these states by some sort of measure. And if you remember, in our fact table, we had household income and occupied housing units. To start off with, I'm going to click household income, and it's going to go through and color all of the polygons by household income. Now, it starts off with orange because that's we had to pick some color, so it started off as orange, but you can just as easily change the palette down here or even define your own custom expression or your own colors. Something else to point out is that while we were in the process of building these polygons and defining the color, QlikMaps was behind the scenes generating pop-ups for these. Now, I'm going to show you later on when we build these out that you can build very complex and comprehensive pop-ups. But QlikMaps is going ahead and doing the work for you behind the scenes to give you some of the basics that you'll need for your building blocks for your larger, more complex pop-ups. Now, we're showing state, but let's go ahead and add a second layer. If you'll remember, we loaded state, county, and postcode, and we're going to show all of those on the map and be able to drill through them when we're done. So let's take polygon, and I'll pick county. Now, QlikMaps is going to go through and it's going to plot all of the counties in the US. But something you'll notice is whenever you try to show a lot of smaller polygons in an area at one time, it can get difficult to see. Let me turn off the state layer so you can see some of the smaller counties, especially down here, they just look a big blur of white. It's very difficult to make sense of the counties. And because of that, we normally start off at a much higher level. I apologize, there we go, a much higher level, and then we drill down into more granular data. So it doesn't make sense to show the counties until we've selected a state. We can do that by defining a drill path here. Under county, under drilling, and under parent, I'll select state. And what will happen is when there's no state selected, it's going to make the county unavailable. Now, when I say unavailable, I mean it can't be selected in our layer control here. And then after you drill through it, it's going to be available, but just be hidden and not shown by default. So how does this behave? Well, now if I single select state, it drills down to my county layer. Also, remember we're still defining these pop-ups. Let's go ahead and show zip code. But instead of showing zip code as a polygon, let's show it as a marker. So here, I'll select zip. There's quite a few zip codes. It's going to take it just a second to pop up. But what zip codes will do is it's going to go through and find all the centers of each zip code and plot it on a map at one time. Now, this kind of makes a mess of your application. You don't really want to, you can't make sense of what's going on because you have many points sitting on top of each other. This is, once again, a good scenario where you'd want to set up a drilling path, perhaps going from county, where it's unavailable, until after you make a selection and drill into an individual county to see your points that represent postcode. When you're dealing with points, you have a few more features that are a few more ways of measuring data that aren't as readily available when you're working with polygons. One of the easiest examples to show with this is we've been using color for household income for all of our polygons as we've drilled down through these layers. But now with points, we also have a size marker. So we can color by household income, but then we could go back in and size by this other measure we have, this occupied housing units. So now we can see that we have a lot of occupied housing units in a high income area, where here we have a fairly large amount of occupied units, but we have a lower income area. So this gives you an example of how quick it is to build a map inside of QlikMaps. We've taken a fact table, we've taken some freely available data sources that are available when you have QlikMaps, loaded them into an application, and built a multi-layer map that shows multiple measures in a matter of minutes. Now, for a lot of our customers, this is what they're looking for when they think, I want to build a map. This is kind of it, but that's never where it ends. You know, just like anything else you build inside of Qlik, once you show people what you can do, they say that is great. What if it could do X, Y, and Z? And then you're left thinking, well, can the product do that? Let me show you that it can. We're going to leave this application behind and instead move over to something that's more of a finished product, something that has been worked on a little bit more. Right now, you should be seeing a map of the US. So please let me know if your screen is lagging behind. So this is one of our standard demo apps. One of the reasons I really like this application is because it does a good job of showing most of the features that QlikMaps are capable of. Now, I say most because I've gotten better at never saying all. Every time I do one of these, I find out that a customer has tried something with QlikMaps that I never imagined was possible to show. I was working with a customer a while back, and they had shown me how they had actually put the picture of a human eye on a map and shown how light had gone through that eye inside of QlikMaps. I didn't even think that was, I never imagined that was a way to use QlikMaps, but a customer did. But back to this particular application. Here, we've got a number of custom territories defined. Custom territories, let me go ahead and say, are a little different than what you have with our curated global boundary library, where those are typically your administrative, your postal boundaries. These are areas where a sales team has come up and said, for example, I need a custom territory that are grouped by a number of states. For example, over here on the west, if we were to turn on the states, we can see that the west is comprised of states in this area. Let's go ahead and turn it back off. They're color-coded, where the darker colors represent a higher volume of sales and the lighter colors represent a lower volume of sales. Now, if the colors aren't clear, we've also provided the text here in the middle of the polygon to give you exact numbers on volume and sales. The text is something that we've been asked for, or that we were asked for a while. Finally figured out a really smart way to do it, and found out that you don't have to just show text. The way we implemented this, you can put a label, or you can put a pie chart, or a bar chart, or a live video. I was actually sitting in a classroom where I heard snickering from the back of the class, and someone had put an animated GIF of a cat on the map. Now, I can't figure out a good business reason for that, but it does show how flexible the map is itself. Also, everything you see on the map is interactive with whatever selections you make. Pay attention here to volume and sales. So here, if I click month and I change January, you'll notice that the numbers change. And of course, that's what you'd expect if we're looking at an entire year versus an individual month. But just to show, any selections you make anywhere in the application are going to get reflected in the map, and any selections you make in the map are going to be reflected back in the application as well. Truly bi-directional. If you make a single click on any object, you get a pop-up. Well, something's going to go wrong in a demo. It might as well be this. Bear with me, guys. For those of you who are done a demo, you're thinking, I'm glad this is already over with because surely something's going to go wrong. Okay, so now we're back. When you single click on a polygon, you get a pop-up. Now, think of a pop-up as a mini web page. Anything that you've ever seen on the internet, you could turn around and put inside of one of these. And that includes things like live video, if you wanted to, a chart, if you wanted to, or in this instance, we're putting another map. This map happens to be another Qlik object, another QlikMaps object for that matter, but it makes it very easy to add additional information to the pop-ups. What I really like about this also is we've created this Southeast territory by combining a number of states. And here we get to see the number of states and how the distribution of sales across those states has made the Southeast here the most profitable area. Furthermore, though, we can dig into our interactive pop-ups to continue to drill down if we want. I think there's probably a better way to do that. Let's go ahead and double click on an area and drill down. This is very similar to what we designed in our application that we built from the ground up. Here are using some of our standard boundary files that you would get from our download site. This is actually a really good time to show you a heat map. I think this visualization is pretty telling here. Remember that the map itself, the states, they're color-coded where the darker the color equals the higher volume of sales. Well, here we've overlaid the distribution of customers as a heat map. I think it's funny that the higher distribution of sales happen to be in Florida, but there are these tight pockets of concentration in Texas and over here in South Carolina and North Carolina. It seems to me if I were this company, I might consider hiring additional salespeople in some of these other areas. Let's turn this off. We'll drill down one more layer into Florida, and here we get to see bends. Now, bends aren't really new, but it's something that we're seeing our customers use more and more. They solve a problem that you have when you're using geographical areas, such as postcodes. If you take postcodes, especially in very dense areas, and you try to roll up your customer base or your user base to postcodes, some of the smaller geographical areas get lost because they're different sizes, and the small ones disappear among the larger ones. Well, whenever you're using bends, that's not a problem because they're all equal sizes. Now, you get to define what size these points are, but they don't get lost among each other. Here, you can also use colors here, just like you would inside of a heat map, to represent density. So here, the darker colors represent a higher density of customers. But if you look closely, you'll also notice that some of the bends have darker boundaries. This is just because with any shape, you can control the boundaries to show some other KPI. Here, I've chosen to use the boundaries. If it's a darker boundary, it represents there's a higher number of salespeople in that particular area. So here, in this area, we have a lot of customers and a lot of salespeople. Where if we look at this area up here, for example, we have a lot of customers and a lot of salespeople, but some of them are probably coming from over here to the customer base. We have more salespeople here than we need per customers. So far, we've made selections by double-clicking on a single area and drilling into a smaller place, but that's not the only way we have to make selections inside of QlikMaps. Over here on the left-hand side, we have a number of different lasso techniques. One is to draw a polygon. This would be, a free-form selection if you wanted to pick many different kinds of points. We also have a square, so you can drag a square over an area, or a circle, where we can draw a radius around a particular group of points. I'm going to go back to the square. I can make a selection and draw over this area here. Now you notice I've drilled down to the points layers. That's because I have logic in place in here that says after I've selected a smaller subset of bends, drill down to my points layer. Now, if we stop here, let's remember how we got here. We started off at a very large sales territory, and then we identified hotspots in our data and drilled down slowly to get to this more granular point-based data. But the whole time, whether it's our states, our bends, or our entire sales territories, all of the data has been based off of these very granular points at this level. Now, when we're looking at points, we have a number of different ways to be able to show them. You see two in this particular view here. We have our sales guys, which are represented by icons. Now, these icons could be pictures of warehouses or trucks. It accepts any kind of image file you can throw at it, whether it's remote or local. Then we also have markers. Now, markers are a really flexible way to be able to show data because we can control the size, the color, the opacity, the borders, the size of the borders, the opacity of the borders, and that's all before you even use pop-ups to show even more information about the area. Now, here, we're only using two. We're using size and color. Here, color is indicative of the customer status. Our current customers are this beige, while our delinquent are red, and of course, our new customers are blue. But we're using the size to represent the purchasing power of that particular customer. So here we have a customer that has a very large purchasing power, but is delinquent. Where here we have a customer that has a very small purchasing power, but is current or is new. So it seems like this guy probably needs to be working pretty hard to build up this customer here. Now, if you click on any of the points, you're going to end up getting a pop-up. Let me show you the pop-up on the sales guy, and we'll come back to the customer in a minute. So with the sales guy, we can see we've got a number of different tabs that we can use. Of course, embedding in native sense objects as well. We've spent a lot of time now plotting your data on the map. And though we can eyeball relationships here, we have analysis tools built into QlikMaps to make it easier to quantify what you think you see. An example of this might be spider plots. So with spider plots, they're used to draw relationships to the customer base. So here we can see that these salespeople are connected to these customers. Now, towards the end of this presentation, I'm going to pass this back over to Patrick. He has an application that I think tells the story a lot better from a different perspective. But you can see here, just as one example, we have a single customer right now who is reporting to a salesperson way across the bay when they could be instead reporting to this particular salesperson here. Now, where spider charts draw relationships that already exist inside of your data model, we can also draw radials. And radials, instead of using your data model to draw those relationships, it looks at them spatially instead. So we can quantify how these points are grouped. Instead of just eyeballing it and looking at it, we can actually say these points are within 19.5 miles. It represents 36 out of 46 of the points, and here's the number that's associated to it. Now, radials are a lot more flexible than what we're seeing here. We can actually set them up to work a couple of different ways, whether it groups based on distances, or whether it's based off of the quantified number of points. For example, put my first 10 customers in the first loop, my second 10 customers in the next, and so forth. Or we can do it like we've done here, where we've instead grouped it based on sales. So put the first 30% of my business here, the next 30% here, so on and so forth. So we can move beyond quantifying just the data that we have in the map by adding some external data sources to the map that we're looking at. One of the first ways of doing that is by using this search button. What this does is it goes out to Google, and I'm going to search for banks just because I know there are a number of banks in this area. And what banks can do is they can, what the search does is it goes out to Google and says, find all the banks in this viewport and place them on a map. Now, clicking on one of the points also shows us the address and what type of bank it is. But we can go even further by double clicking. Oops, if it has a street view, by double clicking and going down and actually looking at the bank itself. To be clear, this double clicking on a point, it doesn't have to be just for one of the Google searched icons. It can actually be for any one of our points. We can dig all the way down to a street view. So Google search provides one way of being able to augment the data. There's also a couple of additional steps we can take. Another example might be if we pull in an external data layer. So I keep talking about layers. Over here on our layer control, this button that looks like 3 sheets of paper, we see all of the layers that are available to be added to the application that we're using right now. Up here, one of these is going to be census tracts. Now what's happening with census tracts is we're going out to an external mapping service and pulling in this layer to put on the map. Another one might be net worth. Now, many of our customers will augment their data just like this. They'll reach out to the external data source and they'll lay it on top of it. But some customers take this even a step further. Instead of overlaying the data, they might actually replace the base maps that we provide with some of their own custom base maps that they have on a GIS server they have internally. One of the more creative things I've seen done was to put navigable waterways. Instead of showing oceans, they actually showed ship routes that they had saved in an external GIS server. Once you take the step of using these external layers to be able to lay on top of a map, it's not a far leap to realize that you don't have to just use layers that are made to go on top of the map of the continents or the ocean. Instead, you could just as easily put a layer that might show a computer chip or maybe the indoor warehouse and all the products that are stored in that warehouse. We have a couple of examples of something like that where, for example, here, we've actually replaced a map of the oceans and the continents and instead replaced it with an image of a Raspberry Pi and the heat distribution over that Raspberry Pi. Or here is the Rome airport. Now, this was actually from a customer. Let me show you what they provided for us here. Here, they took a blueprint drawing of the Rome airport. And we substituted the background that we provide in QlikMaps, the ocean, the continents, and instead put in an image of a terminal inside of the Rome airport. Now, they did some really creative things to be able to collect data and for this particular application. They had a number of beacons that would capture Wi-Fi and Bluetooth signals from mobile phones so they could measure where people were in a given terminal and how long they stayed there. Well, then we were able to overlay this data on top of the image and get things like stationary time or travel time or commutes. I thought this was really interesting because here the hotspots means people stayed here longer. This might tell someone who owns this airport that maybe they want to put something comfortable here, like some rocking chairs or maybe a fountain, something nice. It also might mean that they can charge more for retail space at this particular location because more people are hanging out there. Another way to be able to use this would be, instead of stationary time, look at foot traffic. So foot traffic doesn't just measure how long they stayed there, but it measures how many people walked through that particular area. Notice this might be a great place to put one of those people mover conveyor belts because a lot of people walk through this area. Or it might be a great place to put some sticky advertisements that would grab people's attention and maybe make them slow down. Well, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Patrick, I'm going to turn it back over to you for some closing thoughts.
So if we go back to our presentation, the key takeaways that we want to talk about here, after all the examples that Trey and I showed, there was a couple things. The first one is, with QlikMaps, we really have achieved self-service. Users who, even if they're not technical, we saw that they can take a raw data set. Trey showed with just a really raw, just CSV formatted data that he downloaded from the government. And he was able to, in a few seconds and a few clicks, be able to create a drillable map with pop-ups, with no intervention with somebody from IT. So we've got geospatial data discovery, and we've blurred the lines, we've eliminated the lines between end users and developers. But as you saw, that just because we've made things simple, we haven't lost the power. We can still fulfill advanced requirements, some of which include indoor and venue mapping. And so that's something that we're seeing very frequently now with QlikMaps customers, is people wanting to look inside of a location, or even at a very micro level. For example, as looking at a chip, or as Trey said, looking at somebody's pupil of their eye.
Thanks for presenting today, Patrick and Trey, and thanks to all of you for taking the time out of your day to join us. We hope that you enjoyed watching the webinar and seeing QlikMaps in action. Before we end, here are just a couple of closing remarks. So as I mentioned before, if you did ask any questions during this webinar, we will reach out to you very soon and get you an answer. We'll also be sending everyone a follow-up email which contains a link to the recording of this webinar in case you want to listen to it later or share it with any of your colleagues. It would also contain some location analytics resources that you might find helpful. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude our webinar. Thanks again, and we hope that you all have a great day. Bye.